25% of our land mass being our shared space, that's a huge opportunity to make a statement of what we want to prioritize.
Yeah.
People walking, biking, riding transit are the most vulnerable road users. It's inequitable to have a transit system that's so focused on cars and rewards and prioritizes the expediency of driving over all else.
Hello, Boulder and the wider world. This is the Sharing Boulder podcast. My name is Philip Ogren, and for episode 17, I spoke with Alex Weinheimer in his apartment in central Boulder to discuss all things transportation. Alex is a transportation planner and engineer for a consulting firm based out of Texas, and he also volunteers his time on Boulder's Transportation Advisory Board. We spoke about VisionZero, micromobility, the pavement management program, car-free living, and much more. Alex lives downtown without a car, but he has an EcoPass and a pair of shoes. He gets around by walking, transit, and the bike share. I appreciate his perspective on transportation issues, which is informed by his lived experience of growing up in Boulder, riding the bus, and now organizing his life around car-free living in the heart of Boulder. It is clear that he has a deep working knowledge of Boulder's transportation system, and that his dedicated efforts to help improve our city reflects his love for this community. We hope you enjoyed this interview with Alex Weinheimer. Alex, welcome to Sharing Boulder. Thanks for coming on the show. Go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
My name's Alex Weinheimer. I'm 30 years old, was born in Boulder, lived here the first 18 years of my life, and then moved to Houston for the better part of a decade. Have been back in Boulder for 3 years now.
Okay.
I work as a transportation planner and engineer, and when I moved back, got involved with the city's Transportation Advisory Board, where I'm one of the 5 members serving on that city board that deals with transportation topics.
I didn't know what your profession was. I'd forgotten that. So say it again. And do you mind telling me who you work for?
Sure. I work for a company in Texas that I worked with, starting with an internship when I was in school, and I've stuck with them ever since because I've really enjoyed what we've done. The first project I had a small role in was redesigning Houston's local bus network, which was 70, 80 something local routes. And we got to take a blank sheet of paper approach to it. They said, here are our resources, here's our service area. What would we do if we were starting from scratch? Because over time, oftentimes networks get tweaked in small ways, but no one ever steps back and asks, how can we change a lot of stuff? So overnight, changed an entire network with 10,000 stops and had some of the same routes, some new routes, and saw about a 20% increase in ridership from a network that had slowly been losing ridership year over year. And we did that back in 2013 to 15. And since then, dozens and dozens of cities across North America have done a similar system reimagining type of project, including RTD, which is in the middle of one right now.
Cool. So did you have, from that project, did you have a chance to travel around and give presentations and talk about what you did?
I was an intern doing it, so I wasn't, but I got to be a part of the engagement process and saw the results of many meetings and had to sift through thousands of public comments and learned a lot from that. And so I stuck with the company because I wanted to see that project through. And before we knew it, we had the City of Houston's bicycle master plan, which is the first time it had been about 20 years since they had updated their bicycle master plan. And so they essentially had no plan in place that said that, hey, when we rebuild this street, we need to put in a bike facility here. Everyone kind of punted, we'll do it on the next street.
Yeah.
And so that was a pretty crazy project, looking at over 600 square miles of city and coming up with a network that ultimately recommended over 1,000 miles of bikeways. And at the time, it felt so distant because there were so few projects that were being implemented, and there wasn't a lot of political will to implement these things. And so it felt like this very ambitious vision, but somewhat distant. And then in the last 3 years especially, I've done a lot more street design for some elected officials and agencies that are really trying to implement a lot right now. And so we've gone from building almost nothing to now we're just project after project implementing this network that we were able to identify.
So in your professional life, you're still focused on Houston, Texas, and you're still like totally immersed in that.
Very much
those challenges.
so.
Yeah.
Have done some work up here in Breckenridge and
Okay.
Louisville, and a little bit in Denver. And I have another coworker who lives up here, so
Okay.
there are some projects we want to go after, but there's essentially an infinite amount of projects that we can work on down there.
Sweet.
And what I find very satisfying is they're in areas that are in great need, very denser, very diverse neighborhoods that have been so car focused for a long time, that working on the bus and bike improvements that we were able to do, I find it very satisfying, because we're meeting a need, but we're also able to implement things much quicker than any communities up here. Some of the streets down there is so overbuilt, there's so much room to do stuff, and there's the political will to do it and the money to do it, that the elected officials aren't wary about things. They're asking, how quickly can you get this done, and when can we start the next project?
Cool. This may be too much of a digression, but isn't Houston famous for having very different zoning than most American cities?
Yeah, it's famous for a lack of zoning,
Yeah.
which is a lot of what happens outside of the public right-of-way. But within the public right-of-way, there's still the city, which is responsible for many streets. The county, Harris County, has 4.5 million people in it. There are 4 precincts, each with a commissioner who has 9 figures of discretionary spending each year.
Okay.
And
Discretionary.
And often in the past, that has been used to build streets to expand new subdivisions. But when you have a commissioner who's focused on bike infrastructure, that's a lot of money to get a lot of stuff done.
When you say 9 figures, you mean like over $100 million?
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. Okay, cool. All right. Well, I think we should probably focus on Boulder.
Yeah, absolutely.
We had Dave Ensign on the show who educated us on the planning board. So I'm hoping that we can start off by having you educate us on what does the Transportation Advisory Board, the TAB, do.
Sure. TAB is one of about 24 city boards and commissions, which are appointed volunteer positions. They're appointed by the city council. There's an opening each year, and so we're a 5-person board with 5-year terms. So essentially each year we get 1 new member, unless someone resigns, in which case we let someone fill on the term. We're an advisory board in nature. The planning board, it's a quasi-judicial board that makes rulings. We're advisory, so we provide advice to council and city staff on what direction to take on transportation matters. We see all sorts of stuff. We see projects that we provide an official recommendation on. For the board to provide a recommendation, we have to have a public hearing where we get to hear from members of the community. And so each month we have a typical TAB board meeting, and we'll have 1 or 2 public hearings where we'll provide a recommendation on something. And then we'll have a few other topics where we're just getting a briefing and able to provide feedback. So sometimes it might be a plan that's many years in the works, or before the city staff come to the board seeking a formal recommendation, we have an opportunity to weigh in on what's coming. So we weigh in on specific projects, plans like the Transportation Master Plan, the TMP. There's going to be a curbside management plan. We look at the neighborhood speed management program, which is set up to slow cars on our residential streets. And then other policy issues like the Where Wheels Go, which was a recent effort to identify which devices were allowable in which places, and like what the speed limit for certain devices like scooters would be on a multi-use path. Are bikes allowed on the sidewalk in this part of town or that versus that part of town? Micromobility is something that's coming our way. So each meeting we might have a half dozen topics that are all over the place, but all within the transportation realm.
And then I assume you also do you interface with the planning board for like the transportation demand plans? I can't remember what the acronym is for that, but every new development's going to have.
Yeah, TDM, Transportation Demand Management. There's been very little coordination in the past between TAB and the planning board. That's something that a lot of people have identified as an area for some improvement. So in my first couple years on TAB, we had very little interaction with planning board, but since we've had a couple joint meetings where we've been able to be presented the same information by city staff and weigh in on things as a group, which has been interesting. I think we've learned a lot from planning board and their thought process, and I hope they've learned some from TAB and how we think. But the first time, per the city charter, TAB members aren't allowed to weigh in on applications for development that are in concept review. We're only allowed to weigh in if council seeks TAB's input.
Okay.
And so for the first time at our last meeting, an item actually came for us to provide feedback on a site that was under concept review at Folsom and Spruce, where there's going to be some townhouses and eventually some apartments. And so there was a recommendation in an older plan to add it's a big parcel, there's a recommendation to add a secondary street within that site, and I think someone on council felt that was a little unnecessary, and so they sought TAB's feedback on what to do there, and we provided some feedback on some other transportation matters, but not too much on TDM to get that.
Okay, yeah, cool. So yeah, maybe just to sort of ground this in practical understanding, maybe step through one project that like was really interesting, or like maybe that worked out really well, just to kind of get a sense of like, I don't know, just like how does the rubber hit the road, with TAB.
Sure, I'll give you an example of one that's ongoing now, and it's.
I just realized like my metaphor was sort of literal. Yeah.
One we're looking at right now is the East Arapahoe multi-use path project. So there's this East Arapahoe transportation plan, which was done a few years ago, lays out this vision to improve transit, walkability, and bikeability on East Arapahoe, which is centered to so many jobs and a lot of residents over there as well. But it's going to be such an expensive project that it's prohibitively expensive at the moment. So in 2019, the city was able to get some funding through a grant to build some multi-use paths along East Arapahoe and do some transit stop upgrades at the time.
Is this everything east of 28th or like east of Foothills or even further?
Boulder Creek's around Foothills,
okay.
East out to past 55th.
I'm so familiar with every stretch of East Arapahoe. Actually, the entire stretch of Arapahoe. But yeah, I'm curious to hear what's going on there.
So the city was successful in getting a grant to do some of those improvements, not rebuild the whole road, but do some of the multi-use path and transit stop improvements, upgrading the transit stops essentially. And so over the course of the public engagement, where they went out to the community and provided different alternatives for what could be included at a stop, how wide is the path, what separates that multi-use path from the street, is it super wide and landscaped, is it narrower, leaving more room for a wider path. They came to TAB to provide updates on how that was going. And then they came up with a final conceptual recommendation that they then come to TAB and seek a formal recommendation, where we then have a public hearing. They then have their concept to move forward with, and then they go into final design and implementation. And so there are multiple touch points along the process with TAB, where TAB's able to provide feedback. We're able to hear what the public's thinking and hear from the public directly as well.
Cool. So. Yeah, I hope you can make some headway on Arapahoe, because man, it's challenging in certain places.
Yeah, there should be some nicer places to walk and bike when that's installed in a couple of years.
That's great. Any underpasses planned, or it's all surface level?
Not a whole lot. There's one double underpass under construction at the intersection of 30th and Colorado.
Oh, right.
It was identified in a study that took place 5 or so years ago, looking at installing protected bike lanes along 30th Street,
Yeah.
and then some improvements along Colorado as well, which will have some transit lanes, which will help connect the main campus to East Campus.
Yeah, I used to live on that corner, and it was a disaster. So I'm excited to see that. I just actually meant if there was underpasses planned for Arapahoe, but I kind of assumed not. But
no, and I think that underpass is the last one that's programmed at the moment. I think we've sort of reached the point where we've installed all of the underpasses that are easier, that are going to have a ton of users.
Okay.
One thing that really helps fund underpasses is when they're along a waterway and there's a watershed component to it.
Yeah, so there's more to it than just the underpass.
And then C's been a great partner with the city, providing some cost sharing on underpasses that are around campus, and those are the ones that.
And I assume they're helping
usage.
out with that one for sure.
Yes, they're helping out with that one. So there aren't going to be too. We've got 90 something in town, and I think we're going to be around that number for a while because
Okay.
we've built most
Well, I
of
have a
those
recommendation if you're taking them. The underpass I would love to have is at Baseline and Foothills, so you can cross under Baseline without crossing at the intersection. That would be really, really wonderful.
Terrifying.
It's a terrifying. But I don't know how else to get up north of Baseline except to go to the one that's west of there, but it's not super useful because it like diagonals back the wrong way. So anyways, if these some of these moments get too boring, we can or too arcane, we can edit them out. But one thing that you reminded me of just a bit ago is micromobility, and I happen to live in the pilot zone for the Lime scooter. So
East Boulder.
what? Yeah,
in East Boulder.
in East Boulder. Yeah. Well, I'm curious to just hear how that came up, if you have any backstory to that and how you feel like it's going and what your opinion is of it.
Sure. That's been in the works for a while. It seems like council always wants to get a sense of whether we want to do them or not, but has been reluctant to commit to anything until last year. They set some parameters for what a scooter program would look like, and they decided on looking at East Boulder. I think that's been identified as an area where there are a lot of jobs and there's some missing connections between transit and a lot of those jobs. And it's a place where people have to often travel a little bit from their office to get lunch. Yeah. And so instead of having everyone pile into their car, there might be some alternative choices that they can make during the day. And so far, I think it's been a success. There have been, I think, 2.5 trips per scooter per day, which is...
that's actually more than I would have expected.
Yeah, for the program to sustain itself or to grow, it needed to exceed 2 trips per day. Okay,
you mean for it to financially make sense to Lime?
For it to make sense, I think, from a profit standpoint, and for we are willing to have these things in our public right of way.
Yeah, it's a community benefit.
Yeah, and so that was also done in conjunction with some changes to Boulder Bike Share, the nonprofit that operates the B-Cycle system in town. Mm-hmm. They proposed on a joint effort between Lime and Boulder Bike Share using B-Cycle as the bike provider. And so in addition to the scooters, there's going to be, I believe, 400 bikes in the bike share network, all of which are going to be electric. And so there'll be some expansion to that network as well.
Well, I'll just say that this is a controversial subject in my family because I'm a big fan, and I use the scooters frequently. Mm-hmm. Although I usually have to walk several blocks out of my neighborhood to find one, but and my wife doesn't like them because she says, "Oh, people just leave them everywhere." And my retort to that is always, well, people leave their cars everywhere. They take up so much more space than the scooters do. But and then my kids don't like it because they're not old enough to use them. And it would actually be really nice if they could, because then I could take them places. It would make my ability to use that system much greater. But I totally understand that, it's probably problematic for a lot of reasons to have
I think
kids.
from a
on
liability
business.
perspective, there's that to begin with.
And that's sort of like period.
And then there's
Full
also
stop.
a bit of a learning curve on them.
Yeah.
A lot of the crashes that people have are on their first trips, and once they get a hang of it, they're a lot safer.
Yeah, it saved my butt the other day because I dropped my bike off at a bike shop, and I didn't realize I was gonna have to leave it overnight. So I just walked out the door and was like, okay, how am I gonna get home? And I thought, I just have to get to 28th Street. I can scooter the rest of the way. Obviously, when you're making proposals for how to improve transportation, there's lots of competing interests. What's the priority? What should we do next? So how do you make decisions about making good use of limited resources?
Yeah, our community has the VisionZero goal, which is to eliminate all fatalities in our transportation network, as well as severe injury crashes by the year 2030. And it's a very data-driven approach, looking at where crashes are happening and using that info to predict where future crashes are likely to happen, and try to change how we're operating our streets, how we're building them, how we're operating our signals, how we're educating people about using our transportation network.
So can I just ask this? Is it my expectation of like what a transportation advisory board would have done 50 years ago is they would not have said this. They would have said, we're trying to optimize inflow and outflow and move cars around, right? So this is like a radical shift, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when did this shift happen? Is this like the last 5 years, last 20 years, like last year?
The movement started worldwide in the 90s, but has really taken off in the recent years. Boulder was fairly early for a U.S. city. I believe we adopted the goal in 2014, and now it's a national goal, and a lot of cities and communities are taking it on themselves as their own goal. So yeah, with the updated of the transportation master plan in 2014, that became a goal, and I think it was to do it over maybe a 20-year time horizon. And then with the update to the transportation master plan in 2019, we shortened that to a 10-year horizon, trying to achieve that goal by 2030.
So where are we now? How many deaths per year?
It really varies. Some years there will be 0. We had 6 in a recent year. Our year-over-year averages are, if you're looking at a rolling 5-year window, I think it's one or 2.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So
and then,
is that because we've made all these changes, or because like there's just not that many fatalities to begin with, or?
there aren't. One is too many.
Yeah, for sure.
But when you're dealing with single-digit numbers, there can be a little variability, and you end up with 0 one year, 6 the next. But we're not making progress if you look at the rolling averages. And if you look at the severe crashes, we average over one a week. And
oh, wow.
those can be life-altering crashes,
sure.
both in the near term, what your day-to-day life looks like, but there can be long-term impacts from that. And I think we're at 50 to 70 a year, and not making a whole lot of progress with those.
50 to 70 significant severe crashes. Well, I witnessed one of them this summer. It was really horrific. Anyways, my daughter a couple weeks ago mistakenly referred to VisionZero as Vision 20, and and I was like, that gives new meaning to the slogan 20 is plenty. So, anyways, bad joke, but okay. So what are like the hot spots that you're working on making safer?
So in Boulder, we have 50 miles of arterial streets, which are streets like Broadway, Iris, Arapahoe, Foothills, Folsom, and a network of 300 streets. So it's less than 20% of our total roadway network is made up of these arterial streets. But the arterial streets account for 80% of our severe crashes. And I'm not sure if that's where we've been committing 80% of our resources, both financially and sort of study-wise, and figuring out what to do next. So I would like to see us really focus on those if we want to make some progress on VisionZero, because you can keep building off-street bike networks, and those are great, but people are getting hit when they're walking and biking and accessing transit on our arterial streets more than anywhere else.
So the accident that I saw was at, this won't surprise you, was at Arapahoe and 30th.
Hmm.
And which is 2 blocks away from where I saw another bad accident at Arapahoe and 28th. So, like, maybe could you just step me through like how you would make those intersections safer? Because like I actually don't understand what's going on there. I mean, there's a lot going on there, but
Hmm.
what would you do?
So 30th, fortunately, that's something that we've studied and have some funding coming to do a reconstruction of 30th Street from Boulder Creek out to Arapahoe, sort of along Scott Carpenter Park. And so what we're going to accomplish there is narrowing the roadway. The wider a lane is, the faster people drive.
Right.
The faster people drive, the more severe a crash is.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be able to narrow the roadway, not the number of lanes, but just the width of the roadway, which will hopefully slow cars down. And then we'll be able to take cyclists out of the roadway and put them behind the curb in their own dedicated, protected bike lane.
That would be wonderful. On which side, the west or the east side?
They'll be directional, so you'll be
Okay.
biking with traffic, so there'll be
Nice.
one on each side of the street. And
This,
so not
this
only
is happening. This is unfolding.
we got a grant,
Okay.
and it's progressing to further design, and so this is one of those things that will hopefully come to tab a few times throughout the process.
Awesome. Yeah.
Many members of the community have gotten to weigh in on the concept, but we'll get to weigh in on the final design. And so that'll make it safer for cyclists, where there will be a physical curb that would stop a car
Yeah.
from hitting them, but it'll also just be more comfortable. Be set back with a little bit of a landscaping area, so you're not directly next to a speeding vehicle on a very narrow street. And then we'll also be able to do some transit improvements, where right now if a bus is pulling over to drop someone off or pick someone up, they stop in the bike lane, which means that the bus might have to slow down. If there's a bike in the way, the bike then has to decide, do I go around the bus or do I wait?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we'll be able to install some floating bus stops, which allow the bike to sort of go around the bus stop behind the curb. And so there will be less conflicts between all modes of transportation. So hoping to see a lot more projects like that on our arterial streets. That's something that is the gold standard sort of nationally and seen in a lot of other communities. But Boulder's been somewhat slow to take advantage of those. I think we've missed some big opportunities, and then we'll need some funding to really pick up the pace on the implementation of protected bike lanes and improved transit on our arterial streets.
Wow. Yeah. So when I think about my worst moments as a cyclist, they usually involve a bus stopping in front of me. Like, I either like, yeah, I either make the wrong decision or I sit and wait. I sometimes sit and wait patiently, and then I'm breathing their smoke, but
Yeah.
Exhaust. Okay, well that's all. That all sounds promising. When you talk about what you do and what the Transportation Advisory Board does, it doesn't sound super controversial to me. This all sounds like great. People love 20 is plenty. VisionZero. They like new underpasses at 30th in Colorado. I think they do. Some people complain it's too expensive.
It's $16 million.
Yeah,
it's very expensive.
That's a lot.
We had to delay
lot.
some other stuff to pull that off.
But talk about an intersection that was like in really need of like some sanity, built into the environment there. That's really good.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff's popular. I think we could do a better job really empowering city staff to identify opportunity and take advantage of things that come our way. One thing that has not gotten much tab attention in years past is something called the Pavement Management Program. And it's this $5 million we spend every year resurfacing our streets.
Uh-huh.
And we historically had not asked the question, as we're resurfacing the street and we have to go back and restripe it, what improvements can we add at that time?
Easy things to just sort of tag onto the work order.
Yeah, and just sometimes a street's really complicated and you have to rebuild it to fit everything you want in it. But sometimes we're able to do some really, really low cost improvements as we do that. So one example I'm really looking forward to is Folsom from Pine north.
Okay.
That's the stretch of Folsom where
That's curvy. It curves
Yeah.
around the ridge. Yeah.
Yeah. So back in 2015, we took away a travel lane, went from 4 travel lanes down to 3. And what that afforded us is some space to provide a buffer between the travel lanes and the bike lane.
Yeah.
And we've got some paint there and some flex posts, those plastic sticks in the ground. But as we saw a couple years ago, when a car leaves the car lane and enters the bike lane,
Yeah, anytime you have a big curve like that, and that's the true at the 30th and Arapahoe too,
Yeah.
right? You have that curve right before the intersection, and people whiz through and they drift, and
yeah, and you need some physical protection. And the city council in 2019 inquired about improving that stretch of Folsom in the aftermath of a very severe crash. And it was going to cost a ton to study a rebuild and at least $5 million to do a rebuild where there were more considerable protections between the travel lanes and the bike lane. But this fall, through the pavement management program, we just resurfaced the street and we're going to be able to pour some concrete curbs in place. And it's going to be, the last cost of it I saw was under $200,000.
okay, great
For
something that's gonna make a practical difference.
for a mile of protected bike lanes. I don't remember the last year we installed a mile of protected bike lanes, but we're going to do it for
Nice.
well under 1% of the transportation department's annual budget. So looking at opportunities like that, we've identified Lehigh Street as a place in South Boulder. It runs,
Oh, right. It runs north-south from Table Mesa all the way to Greenbrier.
yeah, Shanahan Ridge. And so it hits Mesa Elementary School, Bear Creek Elementary School, the skip routes along
Oh,
it.
yeah.
And so our transportation master plan
Man,
called,
talking about a street that's easy to go 40 miles an
It's
hour on.
straight and you're going
it's
downhill.
and you're going down. It's wide too, so it feels like you can go 40, 45 easy.
yeah, and so that was a place where our TMP, our transportation master plan, called for a little more protection for cyclists. And we were able to combine a bunch of moving parts by just looking for some coordination opportunities. There was some underground utility work, and then the street was resurfaced, and then the city was successful in securing some safe routes to school funding, which improved some crosswalks, and then we combined in the low-cost bike improvements, and so we're going to be able to improve a lot of things for a low cost. And I think it's because when you combine improvements and maintenance, I think you can get a lot more cost-effective things done. If you just do maintenance and do nothing but put out what was previously out there, you spend money putting something back that you didn't want in the first place. And on this podcast, I've heard a couple times you've mentioned baseline.
I hate baseline.
As do I.
Yeah.
And,
Although it was kind of funny because not for the reasons that you gave me when you sent the attachment that you sent me. But yeah, go ahead and talk about baseline.
yeah, it's super wide.
Yeah, it's very wide.
In town, you want your lanes to be about 10 feet wide, and on an interstate, you want them about 15 feet wide, where you're going a little faster. Baseline lanes are 13, 14 feet wide. So
they feel like interstate almost.
They encourage you to speed almost. And we've got the bike lanes, and again, they're just protected by those
plastic posts. Yeah.
And we've got the same issue with the buses stopping in the bike lane.
And I would just add that as you go along baseline, the plastic posts are intermittent, and there's huge stretches where there's like these absurdly huge, like, and I say huge, I don't mean like traffic-wise, I just mean like the amount of space that some of the intersections take up between like Willville and like Mohawk.
Yeah.
It's just crazy, like, because there's the intersection with there's like a frontage. I mean, Baseline's so wide it has its own frontage road for starters, right? But then when the frontage road comes out and meets with Baseline, and you bike across that, it's like you feel like you're like biking through a parking lot with cars moving around. It's a little.
Some of those cross
freaky.
streets are 70 feet wide when they need to be maybe 30.
Wow.
But that's where it's awesome that Baseline's coming up in the pavement management program. So we're gonna resurface it in a couple of years. And that's an opportunity to, instead of having those dinky little posts intermittently, we can have a continuous curb.
Nice.
And that'll provide the safer place for people to bike, but it also, when you're driving next to a curb, just that presence of the curb, it discourages speeding. it makes it comfortable to drive the speed limit.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an opportunity where we'll be able to, instead of rebuilding an arterial street, which often costs $20 million a mile,
Yeah.
we can implement some of those improvements through something like the pavement management program, and it might be like $1 million or $2 million a mile to make it safer to drive without taking away auto capacity, improve the transit stop experience, make it so the bus isn't stopping in the bike lane, and then the cyclists have a continuous protected bikeway. And I would like stuff like that. I don't think would be all that controversial.
Yeah.
And I hope we take advantage of more opportunities like that. It's not like the infamous Folsom project where there were perceived winners and losers. It was taking from this mode of transportation to provide for that mode of transportation. We need to look for
my
opportunities
observation is I hardly ever see traffic backed up on Baseline. It seems to move through very quickly at all times of the day. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's my perception.
That's my perception, especially. There's some 30th and Baseline. There are some heavy turning movements.
Oh, sure.
And then out by Foothills.
That's right.
But everything in between operates pretty well for cars. But then we have a thing like there's a fatality at Mohawk where an older man was crossing the street at Mohawk and Baseline.
Oh,
and
yeah.
the street was
that's not pedestrian friendly.
The street's just way too wide. And if
is.
we're able to narrow that, to slow cars down, to provide pedestrian refuges as you're crossing the street, I think we can prevent crashes like that from occurring.
Well, that sounds great. I cross at that intersection daily, and it's why I wear my yellow vest, because I just I know that I should probably go somewhere else instead of crossing there. But
you shouldn't have to. We should.
That's true.
Our arterials are lined with jobs and stores and homes. I live on an arterial street, and it's where people need to get to, not just in cars. And so we need to make streets that are safe for all users.
Yeah. So just for the record, my complaint with Baseline is all the wasted space on either side of it.
Mm-hmm.
As you go up and down it, there's just so many places where it could be redeveloped and reimagined, and it would be just a much more productive use of a lot of that space. But I think having it be more transit friendly is definitely seems worthwhile to me. But I want to circle back. I started asking you this question about it feels like everything you've said so far sounds like not super controversial, and sounds like you're making the city a better place. What do people come to the Transportation Advisory Board meetings to complain about? Like, do you have vocal people come to do public comment, and what are they yelling about?
We don't get a whole lot of opposition to what we're doing. The city does a lot of fantastic work, and some of it's fairly in the weeds, and so people have other things that they want to do with their time. Where we hear the most from the community is about the Neighborhood Speed Management Program, which is a program where residents, if they want speed humps installed on their street, they can print a petition off the city's website, gather a certain number of signatures from the neighbors on that street. The city then looks and measures to see how many cars are speeding, how fast they are going over the speed limit, and then identifies where they would want to install some speed humps, and then comes to TAB for some feedback, and then for a public hearing. And that's one where we hear from residents.
Because every resident wants their speed hump somewhere. Is that kind of the issue, or you can't build enough speed humps, or?
For some people, we can't build enough. For some people, they don't want to slow down and don't feel that speeding is an issue, because the speeding that's killing is on the arterial streets, not on the residential streets. Some people don't want it directly in front of their house because they think it'll make some noise. Some people at the far end of the street don't want them, but the people who live closer to the beginning of that street do want them. Sometimes where someone lives is predictive of where they'll fall on the matter. We hear from all different opinions, and we've got 10 streets a year, and sometimes one set of neighbors organizing and support will lead to one set. It'll lead to more opposition coming out.
Well, that seems like kind of small peanuts compared to like we're gonna restructure single-family zoning to allow for duplexes and quad.
Yeah, no, I wish we could get more more attention on some of the bigger issues before us. I think
Yeah.
when we adopted the transportation master plan in 2019, there was less opposition to that than there was to the installation of a single neighborhood speed management project on Upland Avenue in North Boulder. And our TMP should be strong enough that there's an outpour of support and some concern and really some teeth behind it, which we don't quite have. It's a very visionary document, but big things like that, I would like to see more of the community engaged.
So one of the questions I've been it's been on the stack I wanna ask you has to do with so Sharing Boulder is all about trying to imagine a Boulder that's more welcoming, more inclusive, more beautiful. Obviously, there's lots of ways transportation intersects with beauty. But maybe do you have any thoughts about how to see transportation through the lens of diversity and inclusion and making Boulder more welcoming?
Sure. Right now we have this huge jobs housing imbalance, which
Yeah.
leads to tons of commuters coming into towns, tens of thousands
Yeah.
every single day. And that's not healthy for anyone. That's bad for the environment. That's not a productive use of time. It can be a frustrating use of time. And so working to close that imbalance, I think, is one way that we can make Boulder much more inclusive. And that's just by providing more access to housing, whether it's reforming our occupancy laws, legalizing duplexes, encouraging redevelopment of some of our economically less productive parcels in town, making accessory dwelling units and granny flats actually viable. They're legal, but we haven't seen too many of them built. So I think that's one way we can, by providing more access to housing through a myriad of strategies, is one way that we can not force people to commute so long. I haven't seen the latest data, but there was a study a few years ago about housing preference, and what it reveals is a lot of people who are doing that commute want to live in Boulder.
I've heard a lot of people say that about half would happily make a sacrifice in terms of their housing size.
Yeah, I'm sure some people want to live in Broomfield where one partner is working in Boulder, the other's in Denver, and it's a compromise. But that study
that's the worst compromise, by the way, from personal experience.
Yeah, but that data, which is I think it's like 5 years old, so I'd be curious how it's changed, if at all. It shows that a lot of people want to live in townhouses. And,
interesting. Yeah.
Duplexes are a little less popular, and then as you move to quadplexes and condos, they're a little less popular. But there's a huge demand for more multifamily housing in Boulder, and as things have gotten more expensive over the past 5 years, I can only imagine that's increased.
So the place where this kind of intersects for me in terms of really wearing your transportation hat is with respect to parking, right? So we have all these requirements for parking. We have so much parking in Boulder. And I like my vision for like how Boulder could be better is as we increase housing and the number of people, we decrease the number of cars. And so like, let's remove some parking and put in some housing. Is that something you guys talk about when you're drinking beer? Or
there was just a formal effort to change some of the parking pricing with the neighborhood parking program, and then in our districts like downtown, to raise the cost of parking to encourage people to take other modes of transportation if possible, while still not making the parking unaffordable. Right now we have parking minimums. So if you're doing something, you are required to build at least this much.
Right.
A lot of cities are moving to parking maximums, where if
Wonderful.
a developer doesn't want to build that much, they have that choice, and we can better take advantage of our on-street parking. The city's looked at office parks and retail spaces and figured out what that parking utilization is, and almost nothing's ever fully occupied outside of our downtown and our other districts, where we're forcing people to build too much parking, and that comes at the cost of building things like housing.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I like to quip is that there's only one thing that makes me more upset than a full parking lot, and that's an empty parking lot. Because And the one that always comes to mind for me is at Baseline and Foothills at the grocery store there. It's like, to me, it feels like acres of asphalt that I've never seen anywhere close to capacity.
Yeah,
But-
that and the Basemar Shopping Center.
Oh, well,
Baseline
yeah, that
Broadway,
one. Yeah, for
there's-
sure.
Up and down that corridor, there's
Yep.
a lot of opportunity for.
Cool. Well, so this reminds me of a question that I think we may have had this conversation before, but you might know the answer to the question, and that is, how much asphalt is there in Boulder, inside the city limits, the 25 square miles?
I'm not sure what the exact amount. I know that Boulder, like a lot of cities, about 25% of our land mass is public right of way.
Okay. So that wouldn't just be the asphalt; it would include the shoulders and the landscaping
and other stuff. But
But
it's
25%.
Yeah.
So that's like 5 square miles.
yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Some along
Okay.
the lines of that. Yeah, I don't know the exact number.
And so then some large percentage of that would be asphalt or
Yeah,
cement.
a huge percentage of that.
Like
And that
probably 80. I would maybe, I don't know.
maybe, and that's not counting the parking lots. That's not counting all the
Oh,
surface
wow.
parking lots. So
Okay.
it could be somewhere.
So when we talk about how much asphalt there is, it's measured in square miles, probably more than 5.
It very well could be. I don't know
Okay.
the exact numbers.
Well, if you ever get that number, I'd love to have it, because like for me, I just think like if you went out into nature and started pouring asphalt next to a creek or into a meadow, it's just such a stain on the earth, right?
Mhm.
And we kind of just pour asphalt everywhere without any remorse. And like for me, I feel really bad about it. Like there's just way too much of it. And I don't know. I feel like we ought to replace it with housing or green space. But
Yeah, like for millennia, humans have organized themselves in cities far before we started pouring asphalt. For all the economic opportunity, the social opportunity, the cultural opportunity, and 25% of our land mass being our shared space, that's a huge opportunity to make a statement of what we want to prioritize, how we want to live our lives, what our values are, and how we spend our money and prioritize that space. It says a lot. That's where we can really invest in what we say we want to invest in. And yeah, I think if we were to do it over, there would be asphalt, there would be streets, but it probably look a little different than they look right now.
for sure. Yeah, I always am amazed that the street I live on is 40 feet across from curb to curb, and it just feels like, like we could sit there for half an hour and not a single car would go by. Like it's very, maybe a few cars per hour, and to I don't know, to pour that much asphalt on the earth for such a small amount of traffic. And we do it all over the city, right? Like there's just so much of it. So
It's expensive to build. We can hardly afford to maintain it. I don't know if we could afford to remove it.
yeah,
And all the heat that reflects off that is
well,
not
except that
good.
I would expect that it would have some economic value as something else, right? Like if you rezoned, could you recapture some of the asphalt as to give more land for other economic purposes? But
Sure, or rely on the street for the on-street parking and require less off-site parking. Off-site parking requires developers and redevelopers to dedicate a huge portion of their site to storing cars.
so I thought of another question that's on the stack. This is more of a comment, and that is one of the things that we've geeked out about before talking with each other is that we're both non-car owners.
Yeah.
And then that's sort of where our similarity ends, right? Like you're not a cyclist, you're a pedestrian. Sort of. Is that right? You don't have a bicycle?
Sure, I don't own a car or a bike. I walk for most trips that are a mile or two or less.
Uh-huh.
And
Do you have a
then-
scooter?
No,
No wheels. Okay, no wheels. Are you against wheels? I mean,
No, walking's just my favorite mode of transportation. I've got an EcoPass that can get me to Denver or the airport or North and South Boulder.
So the bus schedule's like crazy, and you're kind of in the nexus of where all the buses are too.
Yeah, deliberately located myself in central Boulder so that
Yeah.
it's a 2 block walk to the grocery store and a 10-minute walk to Boulder, downtown Boulder Station.
The transit center on
which
14th.
yeah, which makes it living without a car or a bike a lot more viable. I also have a Boulder bicycle pass. So
Nice.
I use that sometimes for transportation trips, but a lot of times just for recreation.
Nice.
Love
Okay.
hopping on the creek path in the spring. Wouldn't
Cool.
want to miss out on that.
So is that just a reflection of kind of a minimalist ethos, or is it really about lowering your carbon footprint, or I don't know, like
All
how did you get to this way of life?
I never had a car as in high school. I could borrow my parents when I wanted one, but just got growing up in Boulder, was able to walk around South Boulder to most of my friends' houses, and then we could take the skip to downtown, and we could take the bus to Denver. And then when I went off to school, college campuses are pretty conducive to car-free living, I think. And then after graduating, located myself near work, and I just was sort of able to sustain it. And I really enjoy walking. Spend a lot of time walking for exercise and for transportation, and like the exercise from it. And so it's a little bit of environmental, it's a little bit social. You're not bound. Never have to worry about parking, and you don't have to worry about the cost. It costs $10,000 a year to own a car.
Yeah, it's so expensive.
That's not trivial.
Yeah, it's so expensive. One thing I had mentioned to somebody recently was that the most expensive bike repair I ever had was $400, which sounds like a lot. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you compare that against your most expensive car maintenance bill, it's peanuts.
Yeah, so back to your question about making Boulder more inclusive. I've seen a couple numbers, but $8,000 or $10,000 a year is the annual cost of owning and operating a vehicle. And so if we're able to create opportunities for families to be less dependent, where maybe it's not both parents in the family have a car, but they're able to share a car, that frees up a lot of income. Or if we're able to move to expand car share in Boulder, where day to day you might not have a car, but when you need a car for certain errands, there's one available to you. That frees up all sorts of income that can then be spent on housing and could open up all sorts of opportunities to other people.
Yeah, my brain's a little flooded at the moment, but I love the way you kind of told me why you were car free in the narrative of your life, because one of my goals as a parent is to have kids who aren't interested in cars and can start getting around as early as it's safe for them to do that. And and right now we have teenagers in the house, and the notion of maintaining a fleet of cars for teenage drivers is sort of like I'm not interested at all, Yeah, so there's that cost issue is really big, but also there's just like the independence from the vehicle. Like I bike everywhere, and I know how long it takes me to get places, and I never have to worry about traffic messing that up for me. So I don't know. It's really
Yeah, I love the flexibility. If I have a work meeting in Denver, I can take the bus there.
Yep.
I can get off at a different stop to meet friends for dinner. I can bicycle home. It's not you're not bound to that vehicle all day. You have a little bit of flexibility. And I think one thing that we should encourage here is I think I am less dependent on cars because I grew up in Boulder in a place where it was cool in middle school to take the skip and the 206 home, and it was this social thing, and I'm sure by high school some people were desperate to drive, but that exposure at a young age I think endured with me. And in tab meetings, I feel like I'm often the youngest person there at age 30, but the median age in Boulder, I think it's 28 years old. And one of my favorite stats is 100% of people under the age of 16 can't drive.
Yeah,
and
true.
Some of their trips, a parent will need to drive them, but those are impressionable people. And we're a college town with a ton of both undergrad and grad students. where there's a lot of able people who we should be trying to give them as many safe opportunities as possible to walk, bike, ride transit, use active transportation wherever they're going, especially for short trips. Those are the ones that are easiest to do those things.
Yeah, I'm all for all of that. That's great. One detailed question I have for you is, how is the B-Cycle program working? Is it a viable economic model, and are people using it?
It's getting used. It has depended on initially some sponsorship from companies that were able to brand themselves on the stations and bikes. It's since required a bit of city subsidy, 5 figures, maybe low 6 figures annually to keep it up and running, which the per trip subsidy is lower than I think most modes of transportation. So I don't think it's anything to sweat too much. Over time
just to point out the fact that when you drive your car, it's subsidized by the government because you didn't pay for the road.
I think that B-Cycle trips are,
for example,
are $1 or less. But the Boulder B-Cycle, who just celebrated their 10-year anniversary, they've done a great job adapting. At one point, they were expanding north and south in town, and those outlying stations were less successful. But the stations on campus were the ones that were doing well. Good. And so they were able to relocate some of those stations to have them be on campus and then get passes in the hands of students. And that really helped with the ridership. But what I'm most excited about with bike share is one of the downsides to those, the earlier bikes that we had, was they were so heavy.
Oh yeah, the red ones.
Yeah. When you're on a heavy bike in a town with hills, you feel every pound of that bike. Totally. And to take one of the biggest disadvantages of the system being the weight of the bikes and switching over to a fleet that has lighter bikes and they're electric, it makes going uphill a lot easier. Yeah. I think that'll open up bike share to a lot more people will be feel comfortable on the bikes. And so I'm optimistic that we'll be able to, after the implementation of the all-electric fleet, we'll maybe be able to again grow the footprint of the system so that it's able to reach some of our not just the central Boulder and campus, but reach out into South Boulder, East Boulder, North Boulder.
Oh, cool. I feel like I see those white electric bikes nearly every time I'm out lately. It's one of these things where I just try to stay open-minded about, because like personally, I don't have an intuition that I would ever want to use a bike share because I have my bike, right? Yeah, and so I want to use that one. But I can imagine if you lived right here, we're near, we're pretty close to 28th and Canyon here, and it would be a pain to get a bike into this unit that you live in. Yeah. And so having one sitting out there that's maintained for you, is charged and ready to go. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's nice having. I can just go down stairs from my apartment and over to a park, and there's a fleet of bikes waiting for me. And if I'm in a hurry, I might take bike share. If I'm not in a hurry, I might walk. And so I might going from my home to downtown. I might use one mode to get there, and then if it's cold, I might take the hop back. I might bike back. You have options.
Cool. How does the charging work on those things? Do you plug them in at the station, or they
the docks? They're charged at the docks.
Okay. Yeah.
And I've ridden bike share networks all over the country, and I've never come across one that's as well maintained as Boulder.
Nice.
Does. Their mechanics do a phenomenal job, and
cool.
The batteries on the new bikes seem to last an incredibly long time. I've gone on an hour-long ride, and it tells you how much battery's left on it, and it'll hardly go down even.
Yeah, well, those battery meters lie is the problem. In my experience, like 50% is the first bar, and then the other 50% is spread over the other 4 bars. But
I don't think one's failed me
That's
yet.
good. Yeah,
so I've been impressed with them.
Do you have any parting shots or anything that we didn't cover that I think I got everything on my notes that I wanted to talk about? But
no, it's been great chatting with you, and I don't think this conversation would have been happening if we weren't volunteering, collecting signatures bedrooms are for people got us. You mentioned this podcast, and I've listened to a lot of these episodes and really enjoyed them. And
thank you for listening.
Talking about all the issues facing Boulder, but focusing on a lot of the housing. It's good to talk about transportation and housing at the same time, because often with TAB our focus is just on one small project or one piece of the puzzle, and to take a step back and have a conversation like this, it's great talking about how land use and transportation are correlated.
This episode of Sharing Boulder was produced by David Adamson and Philip Ogren. Sound and video editing was done by Philip Ogren. The intro music was sampled from Osladum by Gilberto Gil and is available for use under the Creative Commons Sampling Plus license. Please visit us at sharingboulder.us for show notes and previous episodes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please support us by sharing this episode with your friends and family. Keep sharing, Boulder.